Hello, APUSH Nation. This is Mr. Zagari from the Underground Garage, and welcome to this edition of Content Spotlight, where we take and highlight a specific topic of our units and explain its importance and identify its broader historical connections and implications. Today I will be discussing one of the largest engineering marvels of the 19th century, the Erie Canal. And as always, let's first start with a little bit of context. Following the American Revolution, America began expanding westward. Federal acts saw the U.S. establish a formal way to survey and admit its territories into the Union, as well as doubling the size of the nation. With America on its way to becoming a continental nation, it was constantly looking for ways to connect eastern cities with the western frontier. As early as the Washington administration, there was a concern of a deep division and disconnect between the East and the West. Hamilton and Clay would put their efforts to unite the nation with their respective infrastructure projects, but the debate over federal and constitutional interpretations would stall such endeavors. In an era of democratization, the economy was not isolated from expansion. Although the South would remain idle in such expansion, the North and West, however, would be. This notion of expansion infrastructure was needed. Moreover, innovations in transportation, such as the steam engine, and manufacturing, such as interchangeable parts, would be the catalyst to provide a more efficient means of travel. Prior to the railroads, the need for speed was water. Hearkening to the days of the Northwest Passage, Americans were poised to have a waterway linking the East and the West, and in turn echoing Henry Clay's American system and that call for this massive infrastructure project. The Erie Canal would be the granddaddy project of them all. Work began in earnest on July 4th, 1817 in star-spangled fashion. Governor DeWitt Clinton was the Erie Canal's most persistent and effective promoter. Clinton spearheaded the political effort to bring the canal into being. Think of him as almost like a Robert Moses of the era. The Erie Canal was built between 1817 and 1825 and was 363 miles of water highway that would predate the New York State Thruway, and it connected Lake Erie and the Great Lakes to the west in Buffalo to the navigable sections of the Hudson River in the state's capital of Albany. It was the longest artificial waterway and the greatest public works project in North America at that time. The canal would urbanize upstate New York with the growth of cities, what they first called canal towns, such cities like Rochester, Syracuse, and Buffalo. Roughly 80% to this day of the upstate population lives within 20 miles of the canal route. Furthermore, the first major industrial city of the West, Chicago, would be established as a result of the canal. The canal would make New York City the most lucrative and busiest seaport in the United States, surpassing the port of New Orleans. Economic historian and author of Against the Gods, Peter Bernstein, state that the muddy aqueduct was perhaps the greatest and most economical, effective public works project in American history. By bringing the interior to the seas and the seas to the interior, the Erie Canal would shape a great nation, knit the sinews of the Industrial Revolution and promote globalization, and revolutionize the production and supply of the food for the entire world. The construction of the canal itself was an engineering marvel and was the moonshot of the era. The canal would be 40 feet wide and roughly 7 feet deep. It would be widened during the Civil War and would play a factor in Union victory. In addition, a system of locks and lifts would be installed to make up for the changes in elevation of the upstate geography. The canal was built by immigrants, mostly from Ireland, as well as U.S.-born laborers, who would use pickaxes and shovel, as well as gunpowder, to blast through the barriers dividing East and West. The price tag of the project was roughly $7 million and was not insulated from the time period debate of state and federal power. When the idea of the canal was first posed in 1810, Thomas Jefferson balked at the idea and said, "It's a little too short of madness." Clinton, the governor, wanted to use some state funds as well as selling bonds to pay for the project. In the end, the canal was built and paid for by the state of New York. By doing so, the canal would be a paradox that would be both supported and opposed by Federalist ideology and the Republican Party of the time period. Remember, it's that era of good feeling. Those that believed in Federalist principles would support the infrastructure project, but would disapprove of state funding. They felt funding should be done by the federal government and thus giving the federal government more power. At first, Clinton wanted the federal government to foot the bill. The Republicans would disapprove of the infrastructure project in the sense of urbanizing America and taking away from that Jeffersonian vision, but would support it in the sense that the states were funding it and therefore a local matter, which in turn is expanding the democracy, in their view. The canal would have massive economic benefits to the United States and would help define the American economic identity. Canal boats would be packed with both raw materials and manufactured goods and floated by an armada of barges being pulled by mules along the towpath. As a result, freight rates fell 90% and the trip could take roughly 5 days, not 2 weeks. The notion of Long Island oysters in Buffalo was a reality. Not only were daily necessities moving along the route, but now luxury items as well. Commodities and manufactured goods were not the only items shipped along that water highway. The canal proved to be the first information highway of the time, as it predated another technological marvel of the market revolution era, the telegraph. As it opened the American interior to settlement, the canal brought a current of people and ideas. Social reform movements like abolitionism and women's suffrage, utopian communities, and various religious movements thrived in the canal corridor. Clearly, the canal was a vessel of the reform impulse moving east and west to east. The canal would also be the backdrop of many artistic expressions in the era of Romanticism. Artists like George Harvey would use the canal as a way of defining the new American identity that was emerging. For example, the painting Pittsburgh on the Erie provides factual information about lands newly acquired or settled, but also reflects national sentiment that the land's extraordinary beauty was a sign of God's special providence. Clearly reflecting the ideals of the Second Great Awakening. Moreover, the painting takes on the perspective of the relationships of all facets of the canal. The painting takes the viewer's eyes along the towpath, 3 horses, a guide, a rider, the trees and flora of the area, and the distance, the village of Pittsburgh with 2 spires, church spires, and a brick red step. The work brings the canal, people, ideas, natural landscape, and industry together. Now, speaking of connection, let's connect the ideology of the town to another time period and our historical themes. American and regional cultures and work exchange and technology are 2 of the many themes that we could choose from. While the canal worked to interconnect East and West and make the U.S. a more independent nation, it did, however, have its drawbacks in the ideology of linking East and West. It inherently divided North and South. This would only add to the sectional tensions of the era that would eventually lead to civil war. But with that being said, the canal would bridge the gap of ideas from Hamilton and Clay and eventually Abraham Lincoln of the importance of infrastructure and linking the nation together. The Erie Canal truly helped define the American political and social ethos of the 19th century and would help be the foundation of the American spirit. The canal boom, however, was short-lived as technology waits for no one. The flesh and blood of the mule would be replaced by a steel locomotive rolling down the track. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Content Spotlight, and please check out our unit reviews, writing highlights, and of course, APUSH on the road. Keep on keeping on. This is Mr. Zagari from the Underground Garage.